Hi, this is Tracy Dean at IBM, and today I'm going to show you a demo of using Operations Manager to send an email when the spool usage reaches a certain threshold. So let's first start with a quick introduction to Operations Manager. This is an IBM product that allows you to monitor and manage your VM system. And of many of the monitors that you can use, we're going to focus today on page and spool usage. So in the upper left-hand corner here, we can see that one of the monitors is being able to monitor the page space and the spool space that are on the VM system. So more specifically, what Operations Manager allows you to do is to create these monitors, define these monitors, and set thresholds. So instead of just setting a single threshold, I can set a range of thresholds. So for example, maybe if the spool space is between 60 and 75% full, I want to take an action. If it's between 76 and 90% full, maybe I want to take a different action. And if it's between 91 and 100% full, maybe I want to take even a different action. So maybe a more drastic action in that case. So in these cases, when we trigger this monitor, we can take that action, and that action can be any VM command or in our case, a Rex exec that's going to send an email. Now, in addition to monitoring the spool space, I also have an interface that allows me to look at the spool files on the system. So I have a full screen interface that allows me to see all of the spool files on the system. I can sort them by any of the available columns. I can scroll through the list. I can look at the contents of an individual spool file, and I can purge a spool file, for example. I can also filter the list of spool files by the owner or the size or the date created or any combination of those three things. So now let's go over and look at the demo that we're going to do. In this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to monitor the spool usage. And for demo purposes, we have the monitor set artificially low. So the monitor only requires that the spool be 5% full or higher. Obviously, I don't want this monitor running all of the time because the spool is always 5% full or higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the monitor suspended to start with, which is the state it's in right now, and then I'll dynamically resume or reactivate the monitor, and you'll see me do that. So right now the monitor is suspended. It's not active, but it's defined. I will activate the monitor. Operations Manager will start monitoring the spool. It will see that the usage has exceeded the specified limit of 5%, and it will send me an email. Now, when I'm done, I also should deactivate or suspend the spool monitor so that I don't continue to get. So let's go over and actually see on a VMLTAR. You can see it's a VM6.3 system. I'm on a user ID called Demo Admin. And in this particular demo, I'm going to actually show you the behind the scenes or how the demo is configured before we actually run the demo. And the reason for that will become obvious as we move along. So I'm going to look at an Operations Manager configuration file that I have on the system, and I'm going to look for my spool monitor. And I can see that in this Operations Manager configuration file, I've defined a spool monitor, def-smon. I've given it a name called spool full. And that monitor says that if the usage is anywhere between 5 and 100% full, then I want to take an action. And the interval parameter says how often I'm going to check how full the spool is. So in this particular case, I've set it to 1 minute. Now, this is obviously not practical on a production system, but it's useful in my demo environment. So every minute, Operations Manager will check the status of the spool. If it's between 5 and 100% full, then it will take this action called spool email, which we'll see defined below. Now, we have this other parameter here called the limit parameter, and this is what I affectionately call the no yelling feature. So because I'm checking every minute, if I did not have this limit in here, then it would send me an email every minute until the spool gets below 5% or until I turn this monitor off. So rather than filling up my inbox, what I do is I tell it that I want to limit how many times this is triggered to 3 times, 3 occurrences in 0 days, 1 hour, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. So what this really means is I won't get more than 3 emails per hour, even if the monitor is still true. Now you'll see what happens is right away what I've done is I've turned this monitor off. So I've issued a suspend to say this particular monitor named Spool Full is not active right now. And then remember my action up here was called Spool Email. So if I look down here in the middle of the page, here's the action called Spool Email, and here's its definition. When this action is called, it's going to run a rex exec called SMTP message, and this is just a rex exec that I've written. We can see that it's passing it some parameters. First, it's passing it my email address, tld1@us.ibm.com. It's also passing it a keyword called Spool Full, because this SMTP message exec is used to send emails for many purposes. And then it's also passing a couple of substitution variables, &s and &4. These are special substitution variables in Operations Manager. &s will be resolved to the system name of where this error occurred, so the name of this particular VM system or node ID. And then the &4 will be resolved to the %full of the spool. So instead of getting an email saying that the spool is more than 5% full, I'll get an email telling me exactly how full it is. So let's actually go run this now. Remember that I have this particular monitor turned off. I have it suspended. So now I'm going to issue a command to Operations Manager to, instead of suspend, I now want to resume that spool monitor called Spool Full. So now that monitor will be activated. I have to spell Operations Manager correctly. And now it's going to activate that spool monitor, and I should be getting an email every minute up to a maximum of 3 within the hour. So while we're waiting for that email to go, I'll show you this other function that allows me to look at spool files. So it's a view spool command in Operations Manager, and you can see that it's showing me all of the spool files that are on this VM system. At the top in the center here, I can see that the % full of the spool is 51% full. I can see in the upper right that there are 756 spool files, and I can see the owner, the file number, and the class and the queue, etc., the date and time of each of these spool files. Now what's interesting here is, for example, I could put my cursor on the size column and hit F6 to sort descending, and now I've brought the largest spool files to the top of the list. I could also put my cursor, for example, on the date column and hit F5 to sort ascending, and now I see the oldest spool files on the system. Okay? So now I could actually even purge one of these spool files or look at the contents. So let's look at this spool file owned by TCP mate. I'm going to hit F2 while I have my cursor next to it, and I can see that this is just a console log from TCP mate. I can hit F3 to leave the view, and I can type purge next to the file. And so we'll remember that this was TCP mate, file number 1, and when I hit enter, that file will be gone from the list, and our number of files should go from 756 down to 755. And there we go. Obviously, it wasn't a large enough file to affect the overall % full of the spool. So now let's hit F3 to leave view spool, and we're going to go over and check my email to see if we've received this file. So in IBM, we use Lotus Notes for email. I'm going to replicate to receive my new email, and I'm going to see that I have these emails from Operations Manager. And so this is today's date, November 20th, 2014, and the subject line is spool is 51% full on the VM system called ZVM V6R30. If you remember back here, when I do an ID on this system, you can see that that's the system name that I came from. In the text of the email, this is just the text that I decided to compose and put in the text of the email. Again, I repeated that the spool is 51% full. I put the date and time in there. But I also added some additional context. So within the text of the email, I've included a list of the top 10 largest spool files and the top 10 users with the most spool files. So as a system programmer, I have the ability to have a little more context here before I even go log on to VM to see who might be filling the spool, who's really taking up the space. Okay? So now if I go back to my VM system, let's just actually look at how we constructed that email and put it together. So remember the exec that we called was SMTP message exec. And if we look for the spool full parameter, we can see that when the reason is spool full, then we create this message text, the spool is X% full on the system name as of date and time, etc. And then if we look for it again, then we also say we're going to add this additional data to the email. So remember, this exec sends an email for many reasons. We're just looking at the sections of the Rex exec that deal with the spool being full. So if the spool is full, I'm going to add additional data to the email. So I add this header line of the top 10 largest spool files and the top 10 users with the most spool files. And then I write that out to a temporary file. And then I issue a command to Operations Manager right here. There's a pipe command that I use that actually says, give me a list of users, this set of users who have the top 10 largest spool files and the top 10 users with the most spool files. So this is an Operations Manager command, this status detail spool user, and I'm just using CMS pipelines to get the output of that command and parse it and include it in the email. So I send that data, I pipe that data again out to a temporary file called temp note, and then finally to send the email, if I scroll down, all I'm doing is I'm issuing the exec send file command on temp note using the note SMTP parameter. So now it's being sent to an SMTP format email address. So those were the things I needed to accomplish this. I needed this Rex exec to send an email, and I needed my Operations Manager configuration file. I needed a spool monitor and an action defined associated with that monitor. So with those three things, I'm able to get spool files over, or the spool percent full over to my email system and warn me when something's happening. So let's just quickly go back to the presentation and give you some reference information if you're looking for more information on Operations Manager. Here's the website. There's some contact information for myself, Tracy Dean, or for a colleague of mine, Mike Sine, who works in the Washington Systems Center. And then also on the Operations Manager website, you'll notice that there's some white papers that show some of the other demos and details behind those as well. Thank you.